morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. And welcome to this Financial Management in Focus webinar support for the December 2024 exams. My name is Hazel McLucas and I work as an Education Partner Support Manager here at ACCA. As the title of the webinar suggests, Step Inside to the Mind of the Marker. Our session today is designed to support you with the insights from the latest Read the Mind of the Marker article. Our expert tutor, Jo Tuffle, joins me today to help you with your upcoming exam preparation. During the session, she'll provide insights from the Read the Mind of the Marker article, and we'll take you through technical examples from the article. She'll also share practical advice for tackling the December exams. She'll talk through strategies which you should adopt to avoid common pitfalls and improve your exam performance. And also, towards the end, we'll have a live Q&A. So before I hand over to Jo, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items quickly. At the bottom of your screens, you'll see there's a number of icons. So we have a help icon that will provide you with resources and help information to help you resolve any technical issues that you might experience. There's also icons for both the slides and the media player, and you'll need to see both of these during the webinar, so make sure that you've got them both selected. There's an attendee chat that you can also engage with your fellow webinar attendees, but please note that you shouldn't be sharing any personal details in that chat. And there's a resource list where you'll be able to access resources that are relevant to today's webinar that Jo's talking about, and also there'll be some direct links to take you straight through to them. You can rearrange your screen to suit, so you can resize the windows if you need to, and if at any point you can't hear what Jo's saying or see what she's sharing, then please refresh your browser. Registering for this webinar does mean that you'll be sent an email tomorrow with details on how you can listen to it again. So don't worry if you miss something or if you have technical issues, you'll be able to access the recording. I'm going to hand over to Jo in a moment and I'll be back with you towards the end of the session. But if you'd like to ask ACCA or Jo a question, then please post it in the Q&A box. Please note we can't guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or in the web chat, but we really hope that the questions that we share will be helpful to everyone. So I'll hand over to you now, Jo.
Thank you very much, Hazel. That's wonderful. So we're going to go through Step Inside the Mind of the Marker today. We're going to be looking at the new article, which is Read the Mind of the Marker. It tells you what the marker is trained to look for, how the marks are awarded, and any common reasons for losing marks. Then I'll look at some technical examples on the article, and then finally we're going to look at the practical advice I'm going to give you in enhancing your preparation for the December exams. And you get your Q&A with me at the end. So get asking those questions so that we can start thinking about the answers to them. Right, I'm Jo Tuffle and I'm a management accounting expert. I've taught on ACCA courses for over 20 years and I'm passionate about supporting students to get through their exams. So please listen carefully today and therefore you will get some top tips to get through your FM exam this December. Oh, wait a minute. We've got a poll for you, first of all, and I'd like to understand, do you use ACCA articles as part of your preparation? Can you try and answer that poll if you can see it, please? I'm getting some answers now, which is always good news, means you're out there. There we go. 70% coming up to attendees. Thank you for answering. It's good for it being interactive. It keeps your attention, hopefully. So I'm going to end the poll now. And that's very good news. 47% are saying they're using ACCA articles. You must look at those ACCA articles, and you must listen to those podcasts, and you also must look at those tricky topic explainers. They are all in the same area of the student resources on the ACCA website. They're really insightful, and actually I've done a couple of those videos, and students have told me how helpful they have been in your exam preparation. So they basically will go through the technical areas and how it's tested, and it will help you. The other thing that's really important to look at is the examiner's articles as well. They are the examining routine reports. They are also really important to review because they've also got questions from the MCQ areas, and they give you insightful comments on how to tackle those Section C questions too. So the ACCA articles are a must in your exam preparation, as well as this one, which I'm going to go through now. So read the mind of the marker. It's now a new look and more interactive. It basically uses two candidates' answers to a question C past exam question, and it's from the investment appraisal area of the syllabus, which is Pelter Company. Now, it includes lots of feedback on what the marks awarded and why they've been awarded. So after this, maybe it's a good idea to go and have a look at it in detail yourself. So letting you know that your marker has four things that attributes that they look. They're methodical, they are consistent, they're specific and deliberate. So what that means is they methodically go through your script, looking for marks and comparing them to the model answers. They're consistent when they give marks and when they don't to candidates. They're specific about the marks that they allocate. And you'll see that in a minute. And they're deliberate. They're not going to give you negative marking. They deliberately will try and find those marks for you to get you that pass. So methodical, consistent, specific and deliberate is what they are. Now the key insights from these two candidates were that there was three issues going on: time management, exam technique and answering the question set. So in terms of time management, candidates were losing time by calculating unnecessary calculations not required, and by making points that don't address the requirement, i.e. rote learning. You really must focus on saving time by not doing that. Unnecessary calculations waste time that you could be using later in the exam, and making points that address the requirement obviously lose time because you're not gaining any marks from the time you're spending doing that. Exam technique is clear, showing clear formats on all your workings in the cells, therefore will allow the marker to allocate own figure rule marks where they can. And the formats make it so much easier for the marker to mark. Creating your own format is not a good idea. Use the tried and tested formats which you'll see in the answers in the kits or on the practice platform. Also, look at the mark allocation for the written sections. You must make the number of points for the number of marks to get the full marks. Finally, answering the question set is always a common error. And that's because you remember learned answers. You can't take those learned answers from previous questions and make it fit the requirement. I'm sorry, the requirement needs to be how you answer the question. Now, you can take those learned answers, that learned theory, and apply it to the requirement. So make sure you read the requirement twice, at least, before you start answering. And therefore you can then plan your answer so you answer that requirement, not the one that you've remembered from a previous question. Also, if there is a scenario and the question asks you to comment on that views of something in the scenario or apply it to the scenario, then the marks are there for that. They're not there for rote learned answers. So be warned. These are the insights you need to have in mind when you're answering. Your time management, your exam technique, and answering the question set. So let's have a look at the technical examples from Read the Mind of the Marker. So this is question pelter. I'm just going to do a quick overview of it. It's from the investment appraisal area of the syllabus. And you've been given a table for years up to year 4, giving you sales volumes, a sales price, and variable costs and fixed costs. Now notice the selling price is the same for every year, whereas the variable cost changes. And the fixed costs are also there given to you as sums which are specific. They tell you in the beginning that 25 million is payable in the first year of operation at the start. So that would be times 0. The second lot of information refers to the table. So we need to take account of selling price inflation at 4% and variable cost inflation at 3%. Different inflation rates. Fixed costs are incremental and are already in nominal terms, so there's no inflating to be done. The year 4 sales volume is expected to continue for the foreseeable future. So that is a hint towards the written sections, which you'll see in a minute. We are only using a 4-year time horizon. But why are we doing that if sales volume is going to be continuing into foreseeable future? They've given us some information about tax, and note it's 1 year in arrears, not in the same year. And note also the tax allowable depreciation is reducing balance and not straight line. You must use those the correct way, otherwise you will not get the marks. So the views of the director is the second, well, effectively the third paragraph, I suppose. And this is going to be one of the written questions. They've got 3 views. They've got a 4-year time horizon. They've got a terminal value has to be 5%, and that's assumed. That's not specific. And they're going to be using the net present value and the discounted payback. And that must have a minimum discounted payback period of 2 years. So they've got 3 views on their investment appraisal. And then we have a real after-tax cost of capital of 7% and a nominal one of 12%. You have to use the correct one to get the mark. So here's the requirements. It says calculate the net present value of the planned investment project, 9 marks. Calculate the discounted payback, 2 marks. Discuss the financial acceptability of the investment project, 3 marks. And critically discuss the views of the directors on the investment appraisal, 6 marks. So that's 20 marks. Now, in some questions in the FM exam, you are allowed or can, because they're independent of each other, going to the final question and doing that first. If you feel that you are wanting to save time and you know how to answer that question. But I would suggest, because this is actually a net present value question, and those questions do actually, or those requirements do follow on from each other, that you would do it in the right order. Now, if you're coming to a financial management exam and you don't know how to do a net present value calculation, I would suggest you don't take the exam. You're not ready. It's so important, investment appraisal, for you to not be able to do part A is quite paramount and fundamental to this exam. And if you haven't practiced that, then I'm afraid that you do need to go away and sort that out right now, because investment appraisal is a major topic in financial management. So absolutely, we would be doing this question in order. So let's start looking at how these candidates have done and how the marks have been allocated. So I'll be looking mainly at candidate 1, but I'll be introducing some of candidates 2 in a minute. So here, candidate 1 has done a nice net present value calculation, and their first mark is half a mark because they're going to be penalised by half a mark because they haven't correctly calculated that year 1 sales price. There was 1 mark available for those sales figures, timesing the sales price by the volume and inflating those sales prices up by the inflation rate. Now remember, I told you those sales prices were the same. So this is quite a simple inflating question. You inflate up the sales prices for the first year, then again for the second year, third year and fourth year, and times by the volumes. And if you'd done that correctly, you would have got 1 mark. This candidate didn't do it correctly. They started their inflation at year 2 and not year 1. So they've been given half a mark deduction, effectively only given half a mark for that. They haven't been penalised the whole amount. They've just been penalised that first year. Now these are only penalised once. Any calculations which flow from that calculation will be own figure rule marks. Hopefully that is very clear. So here is the candidate's question in full. We're now going to allocate marks going down. So 2 marks is going for the variable costs. Now the reason this gets 2 marks is because remember those variable costs were all different. And so it's a harder calculation for inflating purposes because you've got to inflate up, for instance, the variable costs on year 3 times and not just easily use the same figure that you'd have done from the previous year. So you need that technique where you're inflating it up to 3 years for the third year. So 2 marks have been awarded here because they've got correctly done those variable cost inflations, which were more difficult than the sales inflations, and they've times it by the volume, and they're negative figures in the net present value calculation. They do not get any marks for that contribution line. That was unnecessary. So there was an unnecessarily calculation there, which would have saved time if they'd not bothered doing it. Again, there was no marks available for the fixed costs, but you do need to put them in, obviously, because they were lifted directly from the question. And remember, in the question, they were 700,000, but if you're doing them in this table, which is in round thousands, they need to go in round thousands to make like for like. However, if you've done that incorrectly, because there was no marks available, there's no negative marking. Now, the profit before tax figure is not the right way of saying that. It should be a cash flow before tax, but again, this is not penalised. Now, it's the tax workings that get the most marks in this net present value calculation. There's 4 marks awarded here. Now, obviously, that year 2 tax figure is wrong, but it's an own figure rule mark here because of the incorrect profit before tax, which flows from that sales figure from year 1. They have correctly allocated to a year's arrears, so it's 1 year in arrears, which is years 2, 3, and 4, and 5, got an extra year for tax. And they've correctly calculated the tab benefits in working 2, which we haven't shown you here. Because they've done it correctly, the marker can now just mark those 2 marks for the tax, 4 marks in total for the tax. Now, if the tabs had been incorrect, then the working would have been marked. And again, they're all own figure rule marks. And then we move down to the investment and the residual value, the terminal value. So there was 1 mark available for the terminal value. There's no marks available for putting in the investment because that's lifted straight from the question. But because you had to calculate the terminal value, then 1 mark was available, half a mark for calculating it correctly, and half a mark for the timing. This candidate put it in year 5. That is not the end of the project. The end of the project is year 4. This is a common error made by students because they see 5 years, but the 5 years are there for tax. They're not there for the project end. So the terminal value always goes in at the project end. But isn't it nice to know that if you do that and you realise you haven't lost all the marks, you got half a mark at least. Then we've got 1 mark was available for the calculation of the present values using the correct 12%. So the method mark here is the most important, showing your workings to be able for the examining team to be able to mark that correctly. They need to know where your workings are. Now notice we can't actually see the discount factors at 12%, but we can interrogate those fields in the spreadsheet and see what those discount factors are and prove that you have used the 12% to recalculate those present values. So this candidate has actually been rewarded nearly full marks. This illustrates 2 important points in the exam technique. A clear layout. Don't make up your own layout. Use the layouts which are taught to you by your tutors, and the layouts are in the answers in the kit questions or on the platform. The marker needs to follow your steps to be able to allocate those own figure rule marks. And also note, if you spot an error, so you did spot that sales error, and you go back and try and review your answer, it's probably not worth trying to remedy it because you're wasting time and you haven't lost that many marks anyway, half a mark at the most. So lessons learned there. So that's part A1, looking at the net present value. Now, part 2 was to calculate the discounted payback. Now, this is candidate 1's answer. Candidate 1, if you look in the bottom left corner, literally just put in 3 years and 9 months. There's no backup to that answer. Absolutely no backup, no workings, no understanding of how that person has done it. They've obviously done it on a piece of paper or on a calculator and stuck that as their answer. I, as a marker, can no longer now, if that is incorrect, allocate any marks to it. Because all these marks were method marks. Unless you got a perfect answer to part 1, you would therefore not get a perfect answer to part 2. So they were method marks. So we need to see your workings. And in the absence of any workings, if it's wrong, then you have 0 credit for it, I'm afraid. So this person got 0 credit for this answer. However, if you come to candidate 2, this is also wrong, but because they've attempted it to show their workings and how they've approached it, they get 1 mark awarded because their workings are shown, and therefore this distinguishes the effort from candidate 1. So be warned, using your calculator and then just sticking in the answer will get 0 marks if it's wrong. We are not going to rework your answer to try and find out how you got that. We need to see your workings so that we can follow them through and therefore not have to rework them. Okay. Now we come to the written elements, and it says discuss the financial acceptability of the investment project. Candidate 1 has simply said, as the project has a positive net present value, it should be accepted. A wonderful answer for a 1 mark question. This is a 3 mark question. So for 3 marks, there has to be more to say than that. You need to think about the acceptability of the project according to the discounted payback. Have a look at that. They said 2 years. Do they give the same answer? Does the net present value say accept and the discounted payback say reject? If not, which gives the correct answer and why is where the 3 marks are going. Now, don't forget, you know from your knowledge that we should always be using net present value as the overriding principle of the 4 techniques, ROCE, payback, and IRR, because it looks at the maximisation of shareholder wealth from an absolute perspective. So there's lots to say for the 3 marks. Don't just remember previous questions where all you had to say was the positive net present value and it should be accepted. So let's have a go at answering this question. So this is now candidate 2, and this is candidate 2's answer to this question. Discuss the financial acceptability of the investment project. Now, candidate 2 got a discounted payback of 2 years and 10 months, and it got a positive net present value of 14.7 million. They are now answering this question in relation to their answer. This is a method mark question. Whatever you got in part A follows through to part B, and as long as you say in relation to part A the correct things, you will therefore get marks. So can you now allocate this answer 1 mark, 2 marks, or 3 marks? I'm going to give you a little bit of time to read it through, and then I'm going to launch the poll. Okay? So just a little bit of time to read it through, and then I'll launch the poll. So I'm going to launch the poll now to see what you think you would allocate these marks to. So I've got nearly 60% of you are answering my question. Thank you. I'll just leave you to have a little go a bit longer. Thank you for answering. Okay, let's have a go. So we've got 7% of you saying 1 mark, 47% saying 2 marks, and 45% saying 3 marks. Okay, so let's see who is right, shall we? I'm going to go through in detail where the marks are allocated now. So firstly, the first one is an opening statement is incorrect, as according to the candidate's calculation, payback exceeds the maximum period of 2 years. So that's an incorrect statement. So therefore, it will not gain any marks. It has to be a correct statement. This simply restates the answers to part A1 and A2, so no marks are awarded. Restating that from 1 is not going to get you any marks, so that is a waste of time. We're going to get 1 mark awarded, though, for the third sentence, because that now is a correct statement, even if it contradicts the first. There's no negative marking. So 1 mark is awarded for relating the calculated payback period to the rejection of the project. That is their answer correctly based on their analysis. So that's 1 mark. And then we're also going to get 1 mark for the reasoning that the decision based on payback should be overturned in favour of the positive net present value decision. So this candidate has scored a nice 2 marks out of the 3 marks, and I would say that is a good answer, even though they contradicted themselves and wasted a bit of time restating part A. So we've now come to part C, and this is a good question for 6 marks. It says, critically discuss the views of the director on Pelter's investment appraisal. Now you need to go back to the scenario to know what the views of the directors were. And from the scenario, the directors' views were the valuation period needed to be 4 years. They were going to do an assumed terminal value at 5%. And they wanted to appraise the project based on 2 investment criteria, net present value and discounted payback. And they had to pass both. So for 6 marks, you've got to aim for 2 marks of relevant comment for each issue. Ignoring any of the views would immediately therefore restrict the marks available. So if you only talked about discounted payback, then you'd only get a maximum of 2 marks. And critical discussion means you've got to focus on negative aspects. Even if you do say a positive to therefore introduce a negative, the focus is critical. So let's now have a go at this answer. With what I've just said in mind, critical discussion, you've got to attack the 3 views, and it's 2 marks per view. How do you think this candidate has done in this answer? Again, I'm going to give you some time to read through it and consider it yourself. Okay, so I'm now going to move to the poll so that you can indicate what you think this answer would get. Thank you for answering. It's really helpful that you're interacting with us today. Just going to wait a little bit longer just to make sure everybody's had their chance. Okay, I think most people should have had their chance now. Okay, so we've got 0 marks, 14%. A whopping great big 60% of you think it was worthy of 2 marks, Nobody really thought it was 6 marks and 24% 4 marks. Well, let's mark it, shall we now, and see. Okay, so no mark is given for the first sentence, as nothing has been added to this information. It's been copied from the question scenario. If you're going to copy from the scenario, you need to add to it. Say because and why next to that. The second sentence is to praise a method is not to critically discuss it. So even if these statements were true, they do not answer the question set. So unfortunately, that is actually not true, but it also doesn't answer the question set. So 0 marks. The third sentence, again, this appears to be regurgitation of textbook knowledge. There's no application of knowledge here. It's also incorrect knowledge, as discounted payback is based on net present values, not profit. So they're trying to come up with a problem. And finally, there's no mark, because to conclude that the directors should consider using a method they're already using makes no sense. The candidate ignored the other two views, so even if the answer had points that were valid, it would only earn 2 marks at the most. So the maximum this answer could have earned was 2 marks, because we were only focusing on discounted payback. And so you should have been critically discussing discounted payback in relation to it being not as good as the net present value calculation to get the 2 marks. And remember, it's things like it ignores cash flows after the payback period. Would have been a good comment to make. And so the other two methods were completely ignored, which was discussing the 4-year time horizon and the terminal value of 5%. So this scored 0 marks, I'm afraid, and therefore shows that it was a wasted effort of time to get 0 marks, sadly. Right, so that's the end of my overview of Read the Mind of the Marker. I really hope you've got something out of that. And I would actually go and have a look at that question, Pelty, yourself, and actually do it to time in the practice platform. If you can use the constructed response area, because I'm not sure it's actually on the practice platform, so you can use it from this Read the Mind of the Marker article, and practice writing out to time those answers that relate to the net present value calculation and the discounted payback. It's a really important question. So we're looking at practical advice now for your exams in the final 10 minutes before the Q&A. I just wanted to point out your syllabus areas and how they're tested. So these are your syllabus areas. All these syllabus areas can come up in section A of the exam. So you have 15 MCQs, 2 marks each. It's either all or nothing. You've got to get it right or wrong, and you get 2 or 0. And they come from all these areas of the syllabus. So you can't ignore your syllabus areas. Section C comes mainly from these 3 sections of the syllabus. You will be getting 2 questions from these 3 areas. You can get a discussion question or ratio analysis from section A, but you're less likely to get anything really from a discussion aspect on the economic environment, more likely to just be tested in MCQs. But notice, F and G are not tested in section C. So you are definitely, almost definitely, and I can pretty much guarantee, getting 2 of your section B questions from F and G. You'll get a business or asset valuation question, and you'll get a risk management question. The other, or the third question, will come from the other syllabus areas. But therefore, I can guarantee you're going to get 20 marks from syllabus area F and G at least. So with that knowledge, you need to direct some study to those areas and practice those Section B questions. Other top tips is have a game plan and practice your game plan. My game plan that I would like to introduce to you is to sort of combat nerves and help you achieve the best in your paper by doing Section A, then Section C and Section B. You need to allocate your time by section, not by question. So I would allocate my time to Section A being 45 to 50 minutes, maximum 50 minutes. Section C, I would allocate my time as being 80 minutes to 85 minutes, maximum 85 minutes. And then Section B would be the remainder of the time, which would be about 50 minutes, splitting those 50 minutes over the 3 questions. You must move on at the end of your time. All you're doing at the end of your time is finding the harder marks and not the easier marks. When you do the MCQs, flag any questions you can't do and move on to an easier question. This will help your nerves. I don't care if you flag the first 4 questions in that Section A. Because you're nervous, it will be because you're slightly unfocused. You can't really understand the question because you're not reading it correctly. Move on until you get to a question which calms you down. Do that question in the knowledge of getting it right. And then at the end of your time, move back to the questions that you've flagged. Often you will have flagged a harder question, which you're probably going to get wrong anyway. So if you run out of time on a harder question, you would get it wrong anyway. What I don't want you to do is run out of time on an easier question, which you were more than capable of getting those 2 marks on. Use your time effectively. There are distractors in those MCQ sections. Really important to understand why the distractors are there. They're common errors. So you're going to make that common error and see your answer. Think to yourself, that was too easy. Reread the question and work out whether you've made it too easy and therefore fallen for the distractor. Have a little time on yourself by not rushing through them and therefore falling for those distractors. So rereading the question before you select the answers always picks up those little common errors. Make sure you learn theory and techniques and not answers. That's what the Read the Mind of the Marker has pointed out. People are regurgitating previous answers and not applying it to the scenario or not applying it to the requirement. So it's important to learn formulas and process. Practice your exam technique for that, making sure you know your layouts for your WACC calculations, your layouts for your debt and equity calculations, your net present value calculations, and your working capital. If you learn the formulas and the process, you're more likely to be able to do that in the exam if you practice 2 times and get quick and efficient at them. You have to be able to explain concepts. So learning the concept and then writing it out in a recipe type format will be good for you. Because for instance, CAPM could be a calculation question, but they could also ask you to explain why CAPM is there. Learning pros and cons of those 4 investment appraisal techniques is important, but don't just regurgitate that answer. Think about how you apply that theory to the question asked. What are the pros and cons of the IRR is a very different question to why is the net present value better than the IRR? It's the same theory, but the application of that theory is different to the requirement. And then definitions of Islamic finance. Islamic finance is a topic that comes up and students do not like it. You simply just have to learn it. And there's no getting away from it. Do a mind map of the Islamic finance instruments and learn them in a set order so you remember which one is which. And then learn their attributes. so that you are easily able to write that information out, but obviously make sure you're reading the question, because you don't want to answer the question if they're asking for debt instruments with the equity instrument answer. Hopefully that's clear. So I've got another poll for you. Do you practice mock exams? Just give you a bit of time to answer. Some of you have started. Okay, I've had a lot of you answer this question, which is wonderful to see. Let's end the poll. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm so cheered to see that you practice mock exams. Absolutely, you should be doing that. You shouldn't be going into this exam without practicing the exam. It's a learning exercise. Don't be worried about failing it, because you're going to learn from it. What you're going to be doing is practicing on the platform you take your exam on, practicing your game plan, practicing that time management and your nerves, and you're 12 to 14% more likely to pass. What I would do, just to make sure you're clear on this, is you must practice a mock at the time you're actually doing your real exam. So if you've booked your real exam in the morning, do the mock exam in the morning. If you booked your real exam in the afternoon, then do your mock exam in the afternoon. Put yourself in an exam environment. Put yourself in your bedroom, your office, or a workroom at work, and make yourself do it to time, feeling those nerves of having to sit to time, and making sure that you have everything there that you would have in your exam room. So your piece of paper, your pen, your calculator, and your bottle of water. Put yourself in the exam room, and if you also need earphones or ear headphones, whatever, in the exam room, earplugs, I think you're allowed, do it with that in mind. So you're there in the same vein you're going to be in for your real exam. Of course, if you're doing remote invigilation, that is also imperative that you practice not using a piece of paper and using the scratch pad, because you're not allowed paper in remote invigilation. So with 22 days to go, I recommend bite-sized study sessions. Try not to spend 2 hours and hours sat at your desk. You must break it down into bite-sized study sessions. Traffic light your syllabus areas. Stop focusing on the things you know, because it makes you feel good about yourself. Focus on the things you don't know. So all those green topics, be happy that you know them and you're confident that you would pass if you got a question on them. It's the amber topics, and especially those red topics, that you need to focus on. You must practice things you don't like, because it'll come up otherwise. Absolutely has to be timed question practice now. You can't kid yourself and spend too long on a question and think, oh, I've done really well on that. You need to grab those easier marks in the time that you have. You must review the examiner's reports, articles. There's MCQs which have been released, which are still out there, and therefore could be in your exam in some similar format. So you must go through those MCQs. And also they give you tips and tricks on how to complete those section C answers to get the full marks. And finally, attempt to mock or more. So that is my top tips for 22 days to go. So now it's our Q&A. So I'm going to have a look at the Q&A and see what questions we've got in the final 10 minutes. So if I use an MPV formula and answers differently from the manual way, calculating using a discount rate from the formula sheet. So you, in section C, absolutely, if you calculate the net present value formula way, you will get equal marks if you calculate using the present values discount factors from the tables. And if you use the discount factors from the tables, you get a rounding error. That's the point. When you use the net present value formula correctly, you'll get an exact figure. They both are equally marked, the same number of marks. So please do not worry about that. If a question is for 6 marks, how many points do we make? Brilliant question. 6 full sentences which are explained, relating to the requirement asked. So 6 full sentences, 6 marks. When doing a net present value question, must I write out the discount rates or can I just jump straight to the Excel function? Yeah, I've answered that. Absolutely, jump straight to the Excel function. You don't need to write out the discount rates. What we do is we interrogate the cells to see what discount rate you have used. Somebody wants me to ask to explain about the terminal value concept, or please refer to the materials. I don't believe it was covered in the course textbook. Terminal value is the same as scrap value, what you're going to sell it for at the end of the contract. So hopefully that's clear. So here they assume the terminal value to be 5%, which is an assumption which has no basis. They should be looking at their project and thinking about how much it actually would specifically sell for, looking at resale values now and calculating a specific resale value. Because terminal values do have a bearing on the net present value. It could make it positive when it should really be negative, depending on what figure you've used. I think I've answered that other question again. That's also about the net present value function. Somebody's asked here, do we expect calculation questions from interest rate risk management section of the syllabus? Absolutely, but they're not tested in section C. You will get interest rate calculations for FRAs, so forward rate agreements. You won't get calculations for swaps, options, and futures. You just have to have knowledge of them. I'm just trying to see what I've now answered. I've got a few more now. When a question asks us to critically explain something, does it always mean a negative point is in the answer? Well, according to the read the mind of the marker, it does say negative. It says you've got to critically discuss. So you probably should focus on the critically discuss, yes, before you focus on any positives. I would have said, I would like to say pros and cons, to be honest. But I think critically discuss to me means saying pros and cons. But they've obviously said in this answer, and they're the markers, that you need to focus on the negatives. And I think that was really because it was saying that they wanted to basically say discounted cash flow techniques, discounted payback should be used in conjunction with net present value. And so really you need to be critically moaning about that rather than saying that is a good thing. That's why they've said that. Somebody says you'd short bullet points in section C to discuss preference. Absolutely do not do that. I can categorically say, please never use bullet points. There are no marks available for bullet points, even if they're right. They have to be full sentences. So if you're running out of time, always write one point, which is a full sentence that's fully explained, and you'll get 1 mark. If you write 3 bullet points, you'll get 0 marks. So please make sure you never, ever do that. Somebody says, which of the 4 techniques are more likely to come up with pros and cons? IRR and net present value. No, it's absolutely all 4 techniques for IRR, net present value, payback, and ROCE. You need to know the pros and cons of all of them. There have been some questions where the net present value is compared to the other 4 techniques. So you need to explain why net present value is better than the other 3 techniques. And so therefore you need to know the cons of all 3 techniques as opposed to be able to compare them to the net present value. And again, do not write that question out as advantages and disadvantages of the 4 techniques, because that's not answering the question. What they wanted you to do was answer the question in relation to the net present value. So for instance, a mark would go, net present value is a better technique than ROCE because it uses profits and not cash flows. If you'd just written ROCE uses profits, not cash flows, that is not explaining why net present value is better than ROCE. You need to construct your sentences to answer the question. Somebody says, could you also say discounted payback has a comparable, whereas a net present value doesn't? You can say, yes, that the net discounted payback has to have a target to be able to compare it against. And that target, for instance, could be set too low because of risk. Net present value does have a comparison. It has to be positive. So I'm not sure you can say that. But net present value ranks above payback because it focuses on the whole project, not just when it pays back. And finally, I think I've got a question here which says, is the study hub enough to pass the exam? I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is to be able to pass this exam, you have to have done enough tuition learning of the basics, the techniques, and the theory, and then move on to practicing questions 2 times, which will be in the exam kits or the study hub kits. So yes, if the study hub and you've practiced the questions in the study hub and the quizzes, then you should be in a good place to pass. But I would suggest that you also go onto the practice platform and practice those past exam questions, practice exam, specimen exam, and the new mock that is there. There is a mock there for you all to be able to do for December. Please make sure you do it. Now, I'm not saying those questions will come up, but it does give you a good indication of practicing your game plan, practicing your nerves, and you treat it as a learning exercise. Be critical about your answers, though. You've done this read the mind of the marker. Be critical about whether you've got that answer right. If you've written a bullet point, then you put 0 next to it, even if it's the right statement. It's not going to receive the marks unless it's an explained statement, which is clearly identifying the requirement and clearly identifies the scenario. Okay. So as I said, what you should be doing is practice platform, examiners articles, and practicing questions at a time. I think we're it.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much. And so I hope that everyone has found today's session very useful. And just quickly, before we close off, I'd like to remind you about the important resources that are in the resource section of the webinar at the bottom of your screen. So we do have a link to the slides that's been shared in today's session. As Joel mentioned, there's the pre-December 2024 mocks, which came out on Monday, and the debrief support videos will be released tomorrow, so there's a link to them. The latest examiner report, there's a link to that, and also the Read the Mind of the Marker article that Joe's been discussing in depth today. And finally, you'll find links to ACCA Study Hub and the Student Study Resource YouTube channel, which are all great resources to use in the lead up to your exam. Don't forget, everyone who has registered for this webinar will get an email with details on how you can watch it again. And I'd like to thank Joe for extending your support, and also the team who've supported us in the back end to deliver this session successfully. Finally, thank you to all of you for joining today, and we wish you all the best in your exams.